Welcome to our first ever OpenAI Dev Day. We're thrilled that you're here, and this energy is awesome.
The AI is the biggest technical thing ever in my lifetime. I mean, it is so profound, and therefore its influence is hard to overstate.
There is a version of you that existed before November 2022. You had the same job, the same skills, the same sense of where you fit in the world.
The danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear weapons.
And then, almost without warning, that version of you became optional. Not because of a crisis, not because of a war, but because of a blinking cursor in a chat window. You typed a question, and something answered back, fluently, thoughtfully, almost like it understood you. In that moment, millions of people realized the same thing, often without saying it out loud. The rules had changed. This is not the story of innovation. It is the story of what happens when intelligence stops being exclusively human. To understand what changed, you have to understand what the world looked like just before it did. It was 2020. Businesses were scrambling to survive a pandemic. Screens had become the primary surface of human life, and a quiet revolution in machine learning, years in the making, was nearing a threshold nobody had publicly named. AI was not new. It had been filtering your email, recommending your next show, approving or denying your loan application. But it was invisible, a background process. It didn't speak, it didn't write, it didn't look back at you. The people building the most powerful systems in this space, OpenAI, Google, DeepMind, Anthropic, a handful of others, were working with a quiet intensity that the outside world barely noticed. Research papers were published, models grew larger, benchmarks were quietly surpassed. And yet, to most people, to the freelance graphic designer in Sao Paulo, to the law student in Seoul, to the high school English teacher in Ohio, none of this felt real. AI was science fiction. It was Terminator. It was something that would matter someday, but not yet. That assumption was, by 2022, already wrong. When ChatGPT launched to the public in late November 2022, it wasn't pitched as a revolution. It was a research preview, a demo, an invitation to explore. 1 million users signed up in 5 days, 100 million in 2 months. No consumer application in history had grown that fast. But the numbers missed something. What mattered wasn't the volume, it was the texture of the experience. For the first time, an AI felt like a conversation. You could push back, it would reconsider. You could ask it to explain itself, it would try. That changes something psychological, something deep. Consider Marcus, a copywriter in Berlin. He spent his first hour with ChatGPT asking it to write taglines, half expecting gibberish. What he got was competent, sometimes genuinely good. His second thought after the initial wonder was quieter, more unsettling. Am I still necessary? Multiply that moment by hundreds of millions of people across dozens of industries. Writers, coders, analysts, customer service teams, radiologists reviewing the same kind of imaging data that AI was beginning to read faster and more accurately than they could. The acceleration didn't slow down, it compounded. Within 18 months of ChatGPT's launch, every major technology company had pivoted, or claimed to, around AI. Multimodal models arrived. AI could now see images, generate them, speak, listen, read legal documents, debug code, write grant applications. The distance between a research lab and a kitchen table had never been shorter. There is a word that reoccurred constantly in these years: disruption. It is a clean clinical word. It makes transformation sound like progress. But disruption, when you are inside it, does not feel like progress. It feels like uncertainty, sometimes like grief. Take the freelance economy. By 2023, platforms that connected businesses with writers, translators, and junior designers saw demand contract sharply in certain categories. Not because the work disappeared, but because the first draft could now be generated in seconds. The question was no longer can someone do this, but does someone need to? Then there was the other side. Priya, a first-generation college student in Chennai, used AI tools to help her write better essays, prepare for interviews, understand legal documents her family had no money to have reviewed by a lawyer. For her, it wasn't disruption, it was access. It was the expert she'd never been able to afford. That tension, AI as threat, AI as democratizer, ran through these years like a fault line, and it was rarely resolved cleanly. Often both things were true simultaneously, for different people, sometimes for the same person. What also emerged quietly was a new kind of dependency, a cognitive outsourcing that nobody fully chose and few people examined closely. When the tool is always available, always faster, always more thorough, the instinct to reach for it before reaching inward becomes habitual, natural, invisible. We're not yet sure what the costs. That question is one we will return to in this series. By 2024, something subtle had happened. People no longer asked, "Can I do this?" They asked, "Can AI do this faster?" Drafts were no longer written. They were generated. Ideas were no longer explored. They were optimized. For the first time in history, millions of people were thinking, with a machine in the loop, not occasionally, constantly. The revolution wasn't that machines became intelligent, it was that humans stopped insisting on being. Capital followed signal, and signal was unmistakable. Between 2022 and 2025, venture investment into AI companies reached figures that made the dot-com era look restrained. Infrastructure build-out, data centers, chips, energy capacity consumed hundreds of billions of dollars. Nvidia, which made the hardware underpinning most of this, briefly became the most valuable company in the world. But something subtler was happening beneath the headline numbers. Power was consolidating. The compute required to train frontier models was so expensive and the talent so scarce that only a small number of organizations could meaningfully compete. Not countries, organizations. What emerged was not just a new industry, it was a new dependency. A world where access to intelligence itself became a product, rented, metered, controlled. This shift from a technology distributed across many to one concentrated in a few would have implications that regulators, governments, and civil society were genuinely unprepared to address. Not because they were negligent, but because the speed of change outpaced the speed of governance. It almost always does. The gold rush metaphor is apt in one way that people often overlook. In most gold rushes, it was the people selling shovels, not the prospectors, who got rich. Here, the shovel sellers were the chip manufacturers, the cloud providers, the companies renting access to compute. The actual value of what anyone would build on top of all that infrastructure remained, for most players, genuinely uncertain. When a technology moves fast enough, the ethics get written after the fact. Not because people are careless, but because the imagination required to anticipate harm at scale is genuinely difficult. We are better at solving problems we can see than ones we have to picture. By 2024 and 2025, the problems became more visible. Synthetic media, images, voices, video, became convincing enough to deceive people who were actively trying not to be deceived. The infrastructure for misinformation, already strained, acquired a power it had not previously possessed. At the same time, AI systems trained on the sum of human expression began to reflect the patterns embedded in that expression. Biases, assumptions, blind spots, sometimes at scale. A model trained on the internet is, in certain ways, a mirror held up to the internet. Not everyone liked what they saw. And then there were the questions that did not yet have answers. Questions about authorship, about what it means to create something, about whether the tools we can build, eventually build tools that surpass us, and whether that is something we are choosing or something that is simply happening? These are not rhetorical questions. They are design questions, policy questions, questions that require sustained attention from people who are not always in the room where the systems are made. It is early 2026 as we produce this episode, and the honest assessment is this: we're still in the first act. The models are more capable than most people predicted, and less transformative than the most breathless projections suggested. Both things are true. The gap between what AI can do in a demonstration and what it reliably does in the friction of daily life remains significant, though it narrows every year. What has changed irreversibly is expectation. Whole industries now assume that AI is part of the workflow. A generation of students has moved through school with it. A generation of workers has had to adapt, absorb, or compete with it. The regulation that many called for has arrived in fragments. The European Union moved earliest and most ambitiously. Others followed, cautiously, unevenly. The global coordination that the scale of the technology arguably demands has not yet marginalized. The systems we built to govern the physical world were not designed for this one. And the largest questions about consciousness, about alignment, about what we actually want from intelligence that is not human remain genuinely open. Not as philosophical curiosity, as live, urgent, consequential uncertainty. When we look back at history, we like clean stories. The printing press, electricity, the internet. Each one gets a beginning, a middle, and a moral. But living inside change is never clean. It's confusing, fragmented, uneven. That is where we are now. The AI boom was not a moment. It was a shift in how humanity relates to intelligence itself. We did not just invent a tool, we created a mirror, and we're still learning how to live with what it reflects. The question that stays with us, the one that animates this series, is not whether AI will change the world. That question has been answered. The question is what kind of attention we are willing to bring to that change, whether we will be its authors or merely its witnesses. History rarely sends invitations, but occasionally it leaves the door open long enough for someone to walk through deliberately. This is one of those moments. In the next episode, we investigate how these systems begin shaping what people see, believe, and trust, often without their awareness. If you want to understand the forces quietly redesigning modern life, subscribe to In Retrospect, and leave a comment with the question you think history will judge us for. We'll see you next time.